on Saturdays, after I graduated from high school, I had a job in a downtown office in downtown Detroit, in the architect's office, and we worked 5.5 days a week. So that was really a 44-hour work week, and went to work on Saturday mornings from 9 o'clock until 12 or 12:30. And then on the way home, I would get off the bus or the streetcar within a block of my grandmother's house. So sometimes I would stop at her house on Saturdays after I got off the bus, and she would have her old lady Armenian friends in for coffee. But the reason they were there on Saturdays is because the Armenian newspaper was delivered on Saturday mornings by the post office, and there was a romance serial in the newspaper, in the Armenian newspaper, every week that the ladies liked to hear. And my grandmother was the only one that knew how to read, and so they would come to her house, and she would make coffee, and they would sit around the living room, and she would read the serial, the romance serial, right out of the newspaper. And I remember very often, because I was back in the kitchen or in the dining room, sometimes I would be listening to what they were talking about, because it was usually, it was interesting to me to listen to them. And because my grandmother would be reading the newspaper, and so often when she'd come to a word that they didn't know, for instance, the Armenian word for telephone was hedapar, and as soon as she read hedapar in the newspaper article, she would immediately say telephone, because she knew that these Armenian women didn't know the equivalent Armenian word for telephone in Armenian, because they had come to America before the telephone was popular, and so they never learned that word. And the same way with the word for automobile, because every time she would read a word like that, very quickly, as soon as she read the word, because the woman would say, "What was that? What was that?" They'd say, "Pepron, what did you say?" And she would have to tell them what the word was and what it meant. So she did that for two words that I always remember. One was telephone, and the other one was automobile. And I always remember the Armenian words for telephone was hedapar, and the Armenian word for automobile was inknashars. And they didn't know those words at all. I mean, what did they know? They were illiterate.
So they also used to talk stories of the old country when they were together?
Well,
because you were telling me that she said that when she was married off at 15 years old,
yes,
she
was still, the tutor would still come to their house for her to read, and write.
Right, but you were telling me earlier that when she married at 15, why did she get married at 15, and what happened that she didn't have children right away?
The reason she got married at 15 is because my grandfather, her husband,
Haratun was his
Haratun had been married and had a son, and his wife had died. And the only way he could get care for his child, because he was working, he was busy, he had that dye works in the city, and he needed a wife to help raise his son. And so in the village, my grandmother was the only person in that age group. She was only 15, and her parents didn't want her to be married, but then he promised her parents that he wouldn't touch her for 3 years until she was 18, because he needed somebody to help raise his son. I mean, there's no other way he could raise his son unless he had a wife, and his wife had died when the child was born. And so he married my grandmother with the understanding that they wouldn't live together as man and wife until she was 18. And when my grandmother would tell this to different people that she knew, she'd always add afterwards, every time I heard her, and she would say, he was true to his word, he didn't touch me for 3 years.
So
It was because she had to help raise that child.
right. So what we're trying to figure out is when her first child was born. If Graham was born in 1907, well, we figured that great grandma Pepron was born in 1885. That's what she put on her papers when she crossed into the United States, and that's what she put on her papers coming from when they traveled from Antwerp to St. Catherine's. She put at that point, that was 1923 in the winter, that she said that she was 39 years old at that point. So I figured it out. That meant that she was born in 1885. Okay, so Mary had put in the book that it was 1900 when she had her first child, which would have only made her 15 years old. But you said she did not have her first child at 15. He waited 3 years.
He waited 3
So then her son Kevork would have been born in...
Kevork was her stepson.
No, Martigues was her stepson. Martigues.
Martine. Oh.
No, Kevork was her oldest child, and that was the one that Graham was running with when
I see.
when the massacre happened in 1915. Graham was running with her older brother, who was 12 at the time, which would make Graham 7. We're talking about the 1915 spring. Graham's birthday wouldn't have been till the fall. So she would have been 7, he would have been 12, and that means that he would have been born in 03. So he did wait 3 years. Although Mary put in the book that she had a child at 15, but
she did not.
That didn't live, but she did not.
No.
And then there was another daughter that was born sometime between Graham and Kevork. Anna was her name.
Yes, Anna. And she died when she was 2 years old because they had pierced her ears and her ears got infected. And that's what caused her death. And that's why my mother never had pierced ears. So when she was born, they weren't going to have the same thing happen to her.
Mm-hmm. It was also written in the book that Mary said that they were going to name Gilbert, your mother, Anna.
Yes.
After her sister, but they said they shouldn't do that, so they changed her name to Gilbert?
No, she had an aunt that didn't like the idea of naming her after the deceased girl, and so her aunt started calling her Gilbert, and it caught on.
Mm-hmm.
And whether she was baptized Gilbert or not, nobody really remembers.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the name she always used.
Right. And then after that, there was Uncle Diron. He was the next one.
I don't know if he was the next one or not because he wasn't born until 1911.
Right. But in all of the records of him, it says he was born in 1913, which would make him only 2 years old. But then there was another child that was under a year old that died in the massacre that was taken from Pepron's arms. And
I understand it was a 2-year-old. From my understanding, her 2-year-old was snatched from her arms and killed by the sword.
But Mary has in the book that that the baby was only 6 months old.
I never heard that. I always heard he was 2 years old.
Okay.